Hello and welcome to The Dark Side. I am your host, Tabitha Purple. Our co-host, TC Storm, will be with us soon. I am so delighted to be with you. It is a bank holiday weekend, and despite it being a bank holiday weekend, we will be on for a small, quick, concise show just to catch up on any news stories. So if there's a story that you haven't thought about this week or that you would like us to talk about, then do just let us know, and we would love to talk to you. So let's get started. Let's kick things off. What has been tickling you this week, or what things are you talking about? One of the things that I saw this week, and I don't know about you, but the news stories always take a particular turn. And because we focus a lot on what we can find in English news media, that can be difficult to harness the world, but we try. And a lot of what you find in the English-speaking world is news about migration, immigrants, refugees, etc., etc. And there's this huge narrative within English media, and I mean that by English language media, particularly if you're from Britain, the UK, where they're talking about migration, particularly in the light of the new numbers that came out. We might get to that story. But the overall topic of migration is talked about in a really derogatory, denigrative way. And so a story that really struck me that I just want to mention is going to be actually looking at what's happening in Turkey. And I found this one kind of interesting because we often have those discussions about what migration looks like in Europe and the conversations that happen around there, and also the political landscape. So this is a story that I kind of wanted to see how our viewers and how Mr. Storm, welcome, is who feels about this particular one. So how you doing, Mr. Storm?
Great.
I said it was a bank holiday weekend. We're going to be concise and quick, but we're going to talk about a couple of news stories that we've seen. And so I wanted to talk about the elections that are happening in Turkey at the moment. And so I'm going to just read you a few highlights from the article there to kind of give an overall idea. But the reason I wanted to talk about this is because it's a trick that's being used throughout Europe at large about the derogatory attempt, anti-immigrant feelings that are being stirred up in order to harness the anti or extremist portion of the society. And so in this particular case, it was an article in The Guardian, and it's from this Sunday morning. And it says that both sides seek to harness support of ultra-nationalist right before the Sunday elections, and the scapegoats will be refugees. On the dock next to Istanbul's Kayoda ferryport, a large screen displays the opposition's campaign videos on a loop, with presidential candidate Kemal's voice booming out through the speakers. Interspersed with soft rock soundtracking footage of the campaign trail are speeches where he promises to deport the roughly 4 million refugees currently in Turkey. And so he shouts into the kind of landscape, which is, you brought them more than 10 million refugees in, and I hereby declare that I will send all refugees back as soon as possible when I get to power. And so the campaign takes this kind of turn for the negative, and you see videos and clips of people climbing over fences. Whether they're refugees or not is not the point. The imagery is what it's bringing up of illegal immigrants and illegal migration, so to speak. And it says the point that he makes is, you know, we have to do this. Unfortunate. He's the kind of person that thinks that everyone should just live in their own country in suitable conditions. It's a really interesting position to take. It's really sad to see that wherever you go within the European landscape, the political rhetoric seems to be the same. It's really harsh towards refugees. It's really harsh towards immigration. It's really harsh towards migration. And there's this real nationalistic ideology that is being pushed in order to harness what seems to be, voting-wise, a very small but vocal and active part of the population. You know, these are older people who tend to vote. And they're trying to harness this group of people to be more active voting wise, instead of going for the kind of silent majority and activating them, they're trying to get this group who are really, you know, anti-human. So I just wondered if you had thought about, or, you know, in the light of some of the stories that you've seen this week, any thoughts on the situation as it unfolds in Turkey, to the backdrop of this is their new elections, there's potentially a new president come in, but it is the same rhetoric around immigration. And what does that look like for us to actually really deal with this issue in a humane way when our politicians are using it as a scapegoat opportunity to drum up votes and have no consideration for the people at the brunt of their fury and hatred?
Well, I think, first of all, as an opposition leader in Turkey, considering Erdogan's history, you might want to be a bit easier on refugees because you might be one yourself pretty soon. And so that will be my first port of counsel. And I think the second thing I would say is that this isn't new behaviors. This isn't new rhetoric. And this is something that is taking place globally.
Mm, mm,
Um, and I think we look at it, and I think one of the biggest flaws, one of the biggest arguments given is that Donald Trump gave birth to this. In terms of this whole rise in this anti-immigrant rhetoric, and I would refute that and say no, he legitimized it, but it's
mm,
always been there.
mm,
All these conspiracy theories have
mm,
always been there, and
mm,
this has been, especially within the U.S., there has for decades now been this narrative that the persecuted group is the white Christian, and especially the white Christian male. Um, and I think you've started to see some of those conspiracy theories and rhetoric gain hold in other countries, but where that narrative isn't applicable, they've created their own.
mm,
Um, and it's always easier to punch down. I don't think politicians have always, no, sorry. I don't think politicians have ever gone realistically for the middle ground and the
mm,
silent
mm,
voters.
mm,
They've
mm,
always gone and tried to cater, and you hear the phrase all the time, their base.
mm,
Um, because the silent voters are always going to be the silent voters. The silent majority, sorry, the silent majority is always going to be the silent majority. And they're not going to vote. They're apathetic. Um, and if you really wanted the silent majority to speak, you would make voting compulsory,
mm,
right? But the reality is they don't want the silent majority to speak, because if the silent majority were to speak, those that are in power would not be in power.
mm,
Um, and those that are vying to get into power would not be in power either. I think if the silent majority were to speak, you'd see um, groups and parties that were far more left leaning
mm,
in power
mm.
than currently exists.
Do you think that on that, do you think that the extremism that is continuing to be perpetuated? So for me, if I look at the historical landscape, it looks as though, you know, the First World War, Second World War. So if we look at kind of a 100-year view of Europe, you've got the First World War, Second World War, where these extremist ideologies were given, you know, people were under pressure financially, you know, there was crisis within countries financially, and the scapegoat was these kinds of extremist views of it must be someone else's fault that did this to us, and therefore it's got to be the person who's other. And so we've seen in world wars how in Europe particularly those who are of a different religious, ethnic, cultural background have been persecuted, killed, gas chambers, etc., etc. And that kind of went quiet, didn't disappear. But after the wars, there was this definite kind of move towards, okay, we shouldn't do that. And those parts of society felt more banished from mainstream circles, should we put it like that. It was always there. And say within the UK landscape, you see the National Fronts, you see all of those kinds of ideologies continuing to rise. So my question is, in a society where you have to, everyone has to vote, where everyone is forced to participate within the democratic process, do you see, or is there evidence to suggest that you see less extremism in these views that are being perpetuated by the two-party systems, or that we see in countries where, you know, they're trying to appeal to a certain kind of voter, their base, their extremist, you know, xenophobic, racist bases that they're trying to get their, what they call nationalistic ideas? Do you think that that would lower that or in any way affect that?
I do believe it would affect it, because you cannot narrow your aim at any one particular base and expect to gain power.
Mm.
And although it's not compulsory in the Netherlands, what you do see is far more representation of ideas
Mm.
within their parliamentary system than
Mm.
you do in somewhere like the US or the UK or many other countries.
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I was thinking of places like Switzerland, which have compulsory voting, and I think New Zealand has compulsory voting, and places like that, where it seems as though the extremism, although present, I'm not saying you eradicate it, it is still very much present, seems more marginalized because everyone has to vote, and therefore what appeals to the base of most people is not going to be that idea of denigrate the person next door, right? It's not, that's not the thing you're going to get those people voting on. They're going to vote on policies that reflect their life. And I think it's a good example to use the Netherlands, because if you look at the local elections here, where the ballots are filled with, you know, so many different types of candidates that you can get, a lot of times people narrow it down by, I'm interested in this issue of water, let's say, how my water is managed in my local area, and then they go to the parties that have a policy that's based on their preference, and then they will pick someone, and in the end you don't end up with people who picking of it, like it does happen, but the people, from what I can tell, tend to vote within that way of picking issues that they are affected by in their local area, and therefore if your party doesn't have a policy that speaks to that, they're not voting for you. So, you know, you can have all the rhetoric you want surrounding immigration, but the reality is, do you have anything that's going to fix the road outside my house? No, then I'm not voting for you. Like that's the person I want running my local government, and therefore that reflects somewhat in the national landscape of politics. So it's an interesting idea. Well, I thought it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out in Turkey. As it has played out in Turkey before, but as it plays out in many countries, this rhetoric of racism, xenophobia, etc., and especially the blame the immigrant for all of your problems, when statistically immigrants are the most likely to be hardworking, tax-paying, trying to build a better life people. It's quite interesting that it's always those in the margins that get blamed, and therefore the violence that is enacted upon them is horrific. And I think in this case, deflecting from some of Turkey's other issues to blaming an immigrant it's a soft, easy play. as far as I can tell, and quite obvious, and very sad that it continues. Europe continues to blame and do exactly the same thing as it has always done.
Well, I think we must also bear in mind it's easy to punch down
Yeah.
rather than to punch up, because a lot of Turkey's problems and its economic problems could be looked at through the lens of neo-colonialism and the
Mm.
impact that the Western European nations and the US and other countries are having on its economy. But what are you going to do about it? You can't do anything about it. And so you're simply going to punch down on those that you do have some ability to do something about. And it would be nice if um, some other countries around the world got together and took a stand. And I believe some are beginning to try to put in place measures to get themselves out of the influence of the dollar system.
Mm. Mm.
And I think as you do that, you're going to see different alliances form. And I think we touched on this a few weeks back in regards to some of the oil producing countries
Yeah.
and their stance towards the US and Russia in terms of the conflict. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens in the future.
Well, I think just to say your point on economy is really well founded, because when there was a survey done by Metropole where they surveyed nearly 3,000 people based in 28 provinces of Turkey, and their number one problem that they had was economy. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10th problem was refugees at 2.2%, whereas the economy being the biggest problem was 56.1%. So I think that, for the average, as you say, for the average everyday person, the problems that they see within their local society are going to be economy. In this case, it's economy, unsuccessful government policies, injustice, earthquakes, education, unemployment. These are things that are hitting the people in their actual lived situation. Migration and Syrian refugees, etc., are way down on the list.
No government really falls for any other problem other than the economy.
Mm.
And I think one of the things that people need to do is, I think people have been brainwashed into believing that the economy is the problem. The economy is not the problem. The problem is that humans don't have their basic needs.
Mm.
And so when we talk about the economy, what we're talking about is that people cannot meet their basic needs. And the reason governments fall for this is because there's enough people saying, wait there, I can't meet my basic needs. So I need somebody that can. And the way they look at it is through the lens of economy, instead of understanding there's enough wealth to go around that everybody's basic needs could be met, right? There's no need for anybody to go hungry. There's no need for anybody to be homeless. And so the problem is not the economy. The problem is greed. The problem is rampant capitalism. And the problem is corruption. There's so many other problems, and I assure you, it is not the economy.
Yeah. Well, I think for most people, when you say economy, what they mean is I don't have a job and I can't eat and I can't pay my bills and everything is too expensive. And I think that when you say that, I agree that the translation of that means that companies are making huge profits and somehow I'm not still able to either get paid enough. If you're making a big profit, then I should be well paid so that I can buy the food. Like that should be the cycle, right? You shouldn't be making a big profit and I don't get paid enough, a living wage that I can eat and pay for my needs and what have you. And I think people don't get that circle is what is breaking down. The more profits that are being made, the less people actually end up getting paid, which is why we have all of this problems with migration issues and people in your own country not wanting to do the work you pay migrants tuppence for. and the manipulation of the labor force. So I think it's definitely an important issue that I'm sure we will come back to again, is this idea of capitalism and how difficult it is to process and deal with that, so to speak. So that was my big news story, because we're doing a short and powerful one today. What's your news story, or did somebody else from home have one that they want us to cover?
I have one from the Netherlands, actually. 1,500 environmental protesters were arrested over the weekend
Oh, I missed this. Go on, tell me. I'm having
for
a quick look up now.
blocking the A12.
Oh, wow, they blocked the A12, really?
And
Serious.
one of them is actually quite famous. She was an actress on Game of Thrones. So they've released most of them.
Wow.
There's going to be about 40 prosecutions for various reasons. But I looked at it and I was like, they said they arrested them as a means to clear the road quickly. Now, if you're going to arrest all these people and not charge them, for me, that's just a sign that you're weaponizing the powers that you have to arrest people to make your job in life easier. Now, surely that is an abuse of power. And I think there are questions that need to be asked regarding the handling of the protesters.
You've seen some of these
and
images.
the use of police powers. Yeah, they used water cannons and all sorts, but people came prepared. Like, people came in
And their swimming
rain
costumes.
jackets and swimming costumes, and to be honest, the weather was fairly good for that. So it was a good weekend for them to protest on, considering they knew they'd be facing water cannons.
They had 80 musicians out on the A12, the A12 orchestra, they called it, playing music. It's the 7th time that Extinction Rebellion protesters have blocked the A12. Protesting on this road is banned under the rules brought in by the local mayor. Oh, okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So I didn't know, why would they ban why this I've got so many questions from this story.
Yeah, so that's a story coming out of the Netherlands, and I think it said there's legitimate questions to be asked regarding the use of arrest powers
Mm,
on the environmental protesters. If you arrest 1,500 and are only
prosecuting
prosecuting
40.
40, look, that's less than 1%.
Mm.
So, yeah. Well, I think
So
it's just
so this is quite interesting. So what they're actually saying is, the Public Prosecution Service says the ones that are being actually prosecuted, so the 40, what they're
Mhm.
saying is it's about defacement, vandalism, insult, incitement, resistance, and dangerous traffic behavior or violence. So they're
Yes.
so it's very interesting that you have a very long list. When you actually look at how they were arresting people, I mean, they've got one where they're literally 3 officers and kneeling on this elderly gentleman trying to arrest him, and I think to myself, this is insane. They say that a police officer was bitten during the arrest, and so that person is one of the 40 being prosecuted for assault.
Right. So here's the thing, like, police officers in the Netherlands are probably more protected than in the US. And actually, I think the laws in the Netherlands are problematic in many regards to the protection of police officers. You cannot insult a police officer. So if I say something that upsets a police officer, that's actually a criminal offense.
What, in the Netherlands, really? Oh, wow, I did not know this. I mean, I know in Belgium, they have really, like, strict rules about how you engage with police officers,
Right.
and, they're, like, really protected over there in Belgium. I know that they are allowed to use force to do to get their job done, and there is no consequence to that. That is just the nature of their job.
Yeah.
So I know that in Belgium, it's slightly different as well, so I know that's a thing. I didn't know in
So
the Netherlands because and I say that because whenever I've encountered police, very rarely do you see them. I mean, they're there, but you don't like encounter them very frequently, and they're always of the friendly variety, if I put it like that. I've been to a couple of protests here, attended a
they didn't
protest,
look too friendly at the Black Lives Matter protests.
but they weren't actually. They seem to be able to control themselves, like in the UK or in other places that I have seen. The police are. It feels much more like they're ready to engage. Like you look funny and they're ready to just give you 2 thumps in your head and cart you off. You
Let me
know, there
tell
are
you something.
cases, but I didn't know that about the Dutch police. I'm
I
very
went
this is like
I
this is
went
a new
I
thing.
went to BLM protests, and I assure you, they looked very ready to engage.
Okay, well, I went to a BLM protest as well. So I'm like, oh, this is really interesting. This is
Um, but yeah, so somebody was wearing a T-shirt. So this is just one example. Somebody was wearing a T-shirt with the acronym ACAB on it,
okay. What does that stand for?
and it stands for All Cops Are. And yeah, because I don't think I can say the word, and YouTube will allow the video up.
Okay, we can use our imagination.
And was prosecuted for it. Now, it didn't actually spell out or say the phrase. It's just a well-known acronym, ACAB. Now, to be honest, I'd argue it could stand for many things.
I didn't even know it was an acronym. I would never have known what that
Yeah.
shit.
But they were prosecuted for it.
Clearly, I'm too innocent. That's interesting. Okay, so maybe somebody in the comment section needs to help me out. So free speech here obviously is not a thing. Because if you speak against the police, I mean, this was an acronym, so you can't even say that in an acronym.
Yeah, I mean, like there was there's been cases of people saying other insults to police and being arrested. So look, as I said, there are actually laws against it, and insulting the police in the Netherlands is subject to criminal prosecution.
Interesting. All right, this is an interesting one. So just having a look up at the kind of freedom of rights. It's very interesting.
Yeah, and look, listen. To be honest, I mean, I could probably get arrested for saying I don't trust Dutch police.
But that's because you don't trust any. I mean, I limit it to Dutch ones. You don't trust any of them.
No, but we're speaking
anyone in any
we're speaking about the Netherlands, so I'm going to be specific and say
I'm like,
so.
I don't police in any country you trust.
So when I hear this story about somebody is being arrested for biting a police officer, I wouldn't be surprised if this person got punched in the mouth by the police officer and the police officer hurt their hand, and then they got arrested and charged with biting a police officer.
That's very fascinating. I mean, the thing is, when I say freedom of expression, because that's a whole dark side topic in and of itself, right? Because when we talk about freedom of speech, I have some serious problems with the idea as it's being touted in many Western countries, because actually the freedom of speech that they like to tout means freedom for consequence. And I don't agree that your freedom of speech gives you the right to freedom of consequence. So the idea that you can just say any and everything and it's protected under law. And in the Netherlands, actually, that's not true. So freedom of speech does not, freedom of expression it does not cover anything that's discriminatory. So if it's anything discriminatory, sex, gender, religion, race, blah, 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 any of those, then it's actually not covered under freedom of speech, from what I can tell.
Yeah, but those are protected classes. Those are typically classes you can't do anything about. You can choose whether you're a police officer or not. And I think one of the other things to bear in mind is that police officers often do say whatever they like to the public, and there are no consequences. They themselves are not going to be prosecuted criminally for saying what they like to members of public. They will shout and be hostile and aggressive to members of the public, and they will not be criminally prosecuted for it. So for me, the idea that you're going to protect the police and not the public, that fills me with grave concerns, because surely it's the public that should be protected from the misuse of power by governments.
Hmm. I think sometimes we forget that the police are an extension of the government. They sometimes feel like their own entity.
That's because there's this myth perpetrated that the justice system is somehow separate to
Your
the rest
political
of
systems.
government and the political system. It's not. The political system set the laws.
Yeah.
The political systems define your budgets. The political systems do all of these other things. They put in place the people that oversee the policing. So this idea that it's independent is a fallacy, and I think people need to stop drinking that Kool-Aid.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, it's an interesting point. And now I'm going down the rabbit hole of looking up freedom of speech, which is one of the constitutional rights in the Netherlands, by the way. Found quite interestingly, but when it comes to court, often it's not upheld. Interestingly enough, the person is often found in, according to a Leiden law blog, which is a university here in the Netherlands. But yeah, interesting. This is interesting stuff today. Thank you very much. All right, do we have any other news stories before we let everyone go back to their bank holiday weekend?
No, you picked one, I picked one. I mean, if you've got anything else to share.
No, I've been reading a lot this weekend, but it's been on all stuff that would take a very long time to unpack. So if none of our viewers have anything, I think we're going to wrap it up for this evening and let everybody enjoy. If you're in Europe, it's definitely a nice long bank holiday weekend from the UK all the way through all the European countries. They seem to be enjoying a lovely bank holiday weekend with weather that is fit for a great day. It's just lovely, beautiful and sunny. Righty. Well, then that's us for this evening. By some amazing opportunity, the two of us together talking about the dark side, and we did 32 minutes. Right. Thank you very much for joining us this evening on the dark side. This was just a short episode, just to touch base with you and to come on with 2 issues. Since it's a bank holiday weekend, you should be out enjoying the sunshine, really, or resting and recovering, ready for a nice day ahead. So we're going to leave you to it. Thank you very much for joining us. If there is a topic that you would like us to cover, please do put that into the comment section. If you are joining us next week, then please do like, share, subscribe. Make sure you get the notifications button so that you actually get notified that we're coming on live. We try to put the notification up early enough that you know what time it is, but it is always 9 o'clock Central European time, or within some minutes of 9 o'clock Central European time. Mr. Storm.
Yeah, actually, a news story just came to mind, actually, that I think is interesting. It comes out of the US. And there's 2 states in the US that are particularly problematic. I mean, the first one's Florida, and people just go, it's Florida. You expect Florida. And the other one is Texas, and people just go, oh, Texas. And that is that, and this is the real surprising part. It's a Republican-controlled majority, but they have voted to impeach the state attorney general there.
I'm sorry, what now?
Also a Republican, for misuse of power and a whole bunch of other charges. So they're due to vote on that soon, and that will be interesting to see the outcome and results of that. The fact that it went as far as they got the vote for impeachment or to impeach him, we'll now see if he's convicted of that.
Okay, that sounds very interesting.
And it is, because it's a Republican-held state. It's a Republican majority, and this guy is a massive Donald Trump supporter. And so, yeah.
Okay, and news just in. So for those of you that were here at the beginning and saw the
Yeah,
news,
Erdogan declared himself the winner.
He's declared himself the winner. And so it looks like, well, in his words, the only winner is Turkey, is the people. So there you go. People are celebrating that extremism did not win the day. Interesting. We'll keep you posted here on the dark side as to how these things continue to unfold as we can. Have a great Sunday evening. Have a great week whenever you're watching this. Enjoy. We will see you here next time on the dark side. Thank you very much, as always, my co-host, Mr. Storm. We'll see you next week. Peace out. Your turn.
Ditto.
Like, share, subscribe. Bye.